Well, hello, everyone. Welcome. It always brings us so much joy to watch you all signing in from all around the world. We are so glad you're here. My name is Caroline Ahrens. I am Renovaré's Director of Education, and it brings me joy to welcome you to this webinar, which we're calling Your Life as a Laboratory. What spiritual experiment might you try in 2023? There's a lot of interest around this topic. Your life as a laboratory, maybe, just maybe you could conduct some kind of experiment with a virtue or a practice in 2023. And so I'm excited to introduce you to the panelists who are going to help us think about this. First of all, we have Richard Foster with us. I'm sure his name is very familiar to all of you. Richard is the founder, past president, and a current team member of Renovaré. He studied at George Fox and Fuller Theological Seminary. He's served as a pastor. He's taught all around the world on spiritual formation. He's the author of dozens of articles and now 7 books. Your bio, when I copied it, Richard said 6 books, but number 7 just came out, called Learning Humility. Like I said, we're just about to start it in the book club, and we're really excited. Richard and his wife Carolyn have 2 grown children, 9 grandchildren, and live near Denver, Colorado. And when we got on to begin, there was no fire in Richard's fireplace, and there's so much talk about tending the fire. And how can't there be a fire? And so he immediately built a fire about 10 minutes ago. So thank you, Richard. Thanks for doing this. We're glad you're here. Also here, speaking of Richard's 2 children, one of them is here, Nathan Foster. Many of you know Nathan, of course, as well. He's the director of community life here at Renovaré. He heads up the Fellowship of the Burning Heart, and he hosts the Renovaré podcast and the Friends in Formation podcast. Formerly, he was an associate professor of social work and served as the Andrews Chair in Spiritual Formation at Spring Arbor University. He was also a licensed clinical social worker and certified addictions counselor. He's published 2 books, Wisdom Chaser, which is very much about Richard and Nate's relationship, and then The Making of an Ordinary Saint, My Journey from Frustration to Joy with the Spiritual Disciplines. I planned on holding that up, but I forgot that I loaned it to my son, so it is currently in good use. So, do you have it? Oh, there you go. That is being a good dad right there.
You just keep it by you all the time, right? Just as a well done.
And this is the other one.
Look at you.
Yes.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
Both such good books. Well, listen, thank you to you both for being here. This is, the last 2 Januaries, we started doing webinars when COVID hit. And then, so there's been 2 Januaries since then. And the last 2 Januaries, in January, we've done some kind of webinar on having a rule of life or rhythm of life, paying attention to kind of your practices and your rhythms. And that's, of course, there's no reason why that has to be done in January, except that there's kind of, psychologists talk about the fresh start effect. It's kind of a chance to think about, how might I want my life to unfold this year? So this year we thought, well, rather than just doing another rule of life webinar, because folks can go back and watch those first 2, it might be fun to talk about how sometimes there's an opportunity to layer on top of your rule of life some kind of holy experiment for the year. And you guys seem like the perfect people to talk to about this because, Richard, your new book came out of exactly that, right? You felt kind of a nudge. You want to, for folks who haven't read it, what happened, how it became an experiment?
Well, I had been just watching our culture for some years, the kind of raging narcissism of the day, and what a contrast to the centuries of those who have thought about virtue ethics, that humility was the most foundational of all of the virtues and the sort of the beginning point, and that's disappearing in our day. And I kept wondering why. And it was actually on New Year's Eve I was thinking a little bit about New Year's resolutions. Now, I don't like them because I'm no good at them. I mean, they last about 2.5 weeks, and
That's because you're a
but
disciplined guy there.
yeah, right. I was just, thinking about it, and then I just really felt addressed with 2 words: learn humility. And I thought, oh, see, that's for me. And I need to learn this and to kind of work my way through, figure it out a little bit. And so that's how it started.
Yeah.
Very simple. And so I had someone had given me a red journal, as a gift. And so I started scribbling in it. Now I have probably a dozen journals that are half written over it on the shelves there. So I'm not good at this either, but I just started jotting notes and reading a bit, and I thought, well, let's make this an experiment so I can learn. So that's the way it got underway. I didn't know whether it would have any, because it was kind of stream of consciousness. It was experimenting with things. It was just reading and comments. And then Nate came. I didn't tell anybody about this except my wife. And then Nate was the first one outside of Carolyn that I mentioned anything. And Nate had a great comment. You want to tell it?
Oh no, I'd rather hear it from you.
Have it for me. You said, oh, that'll make you famous for sure. Meaning it's totally, who wants to read a book on humility, number one?
Right.
And isn't it a sort of contradiction in terms to write a book on humility that deals with, hiddenness and so on, and publishing needs platform and all those kinds of things. So it felt like this oxymoron that I was working on, but that's kind of fun to see what happens.
Yeah.
But hey, you got to learn to be an expert on humility.
I remember hearing this guy told me he was in seminary, and he swears that he heard one student say to the other student, "Man, I just crushed that exam on humility."
Exactly.
So,
that, see how, it just, that's the last thing we want, is somebody who thinks they're an expert on this stuff.
Right.
That's a surest sign that they're far, far from it. We're all beginners in this, and we're all learning and trying to learn from one another, as well as from the wonderful people from the past. We try to learn from them too, because they can speak into us sometimes in ways that none of the contemporary stuff does.
Yeah. So good.
Yeah.
So you came to mind as someone who could help us think about conducting an experiment for a year. And then Nate, I think of The Making of an Ordinary Saint, that book. You kind of set out, I think you said you set out to spend a year experimenting with the classic spiritual practices that are in your dad's book, Celebration of Discipline. And then it turned into how many years? 4 years. But same kind of idea, where your dad in this case was trying to learn about a particular virtue. You were trying to experiment with different practices. Glad that you set out to do that?
Am I glad?
Yes. Yeah. Was it worth doing? I think it was, as a reader of your book, but
it was worth doing. I don't know if it was worth writing the book about it, but it was certainly worth doing.
It was.
Oh, the wonderful thing that Nathan did with that was move into experiences that were uniquely his, to kind of fill out what we're talking about these things. And so, a cross-country or long country bike ride and what that taught him, and, just things like that. Yeah. So they were ordinary That's why it's an ordinary saint, the making of an ordinary saint.
Yeah,
Yeah,
love it. Yeah, stuff we do in our actual lives where the rubber
absolutely.
quite literally meets the road. Okay, so we have pitched this to people. It's still relatively close to January 1. People are thinking about the year before them, and we've pitched it to them of like, hey, is there maybe something you're being invited to learn or experiment with this year on top of your normal rhythms? And so maybe the first group of questions I can ask you from that people submitted have to do with, how do I know if that's a good idea for me? So first of all, maybe I can ask you guys, is choosing a virtue or a spiritual discipline or practice to experiment with, is that a good idea for everybody in every season? What do you guys think?
I would answer yes and no and maybe.
I was waiting for the maybe. Yeah.
That is
So,
just look, I'm 80 years old. This is absolutely the first time that I have tried anything akin to this. So don't you who are listening or watching, don't lay another burden on yourself that isn't right for you. Let's just watch and see and listen for the Debar Yahweh, the word of the Lord, and see if there's something. And not turn it into another legalism. Does that make sense? I mean, in a sense, I know you're wanting people to think of practices, and I'm sort of saying, well, I don't know.
Disciplines, they're so overrated, right?
Yeah. I even heard some guys saying you should celebrate them. I don't know. Yeah. What do you think, Nate? What do you think about this idea of being experimental, considering if you're being invited to something? How do you think about that?
Yeah, I'm a fan. I think it's a good thing. And I think of it as an issue of prayer. That if you feel that sense of maybe I should do something new, or maybe God might have something for me, then just ask and then wait and see what bubbles up. Usually, kind of following the longings or the pain points, the wonder, the curiosity. Those are usually good places. I think that God's quite good at inviting us into opportunities, and a little like what you're saying, Dad. The practices are just to bring us before God. They're just to give God access to our lives, and so in a sense, they're what exactly you're doing and how it meets a kind of flavor of your individual personality in life is less important as just simply giving God access, and potentially in some new ways, intentionally, or discovering ordinary ones that are just kind of woven into our daily lives.
Yeah.
It's so important for us to know that our entire life is a laboratory, or for the Americans, a laboratory.
Isn't that a bathroom? What's one of those is a bathroom, right?
Yeah, no.
Is that
Anyways.
a Canadian thing? Sorry.
The lavatory. Lavatory is the bathroom one. It's with a V. Okay. No, but Richard, say more about that, because I had some questions I was going to ask you later about thinking about our lives as a laboratory or laboratory for my American friends. And I would rather we not think of our lives as a lavatory.
Oh, there's something there. We could work that one for sure.
True. That is very true. But I'll just feel flushed if we do that. So,
well, I may slip out and use that second word.
Fair.
You're 80. You got those privileges. Yes.
Well, we just see that who we are, and I mean, God has invited us into a interactive, participatory relationship so that we are working together with God on whatever is at hand. You know, if we're struggling with finding a babysitter for the kids, we learn, as in the Lord's Prayer, we learn to pray for daily babysitters, things like that. And then we see what happens and where we go from there. And so all of our life experience, but let's not make this too complicated. Let's not get too worried about it. I mean, sometimes I remember when I used to teach in college, and some of these students would get so intense. I called it the white knuckle club. And they're trying to come into God. And relax. Go watch a baseball game, or whatever, a basketball. Or you go watch a Super Bowl, you know.
How is that spiritual? How am I going to do that? How am I going to watch a game and be spiritual?
I hope you will learn to laugh. That is a good sign that you and God laughing together. And see that Jesus is our friend to come alongside of us. Now he's our Lord to teach us, and he's our prophet to teach us, and Lord to rule us, and friend to come alongside of us. So we just, I mean, I've had different occasions where I had a distinct sense, especially when I would get so serious. I mean, see, that's an occupational hazard of religious folks to become stuffy bores. And different times when God would just laugh and just say, oh, you know, knock it off. And enjoy life. Enjoy it. Enjoy it with me. Doesn't it make good sense? A good, Carolyn, soccer game, which is what we call football.
Hockey, man. It's the spiritual discipline of watching hockey. Yes.
Oh, there you go.
I'm thinking
I've had a harder time with hockey. It's like our American football. People get beat up. So, you know, I'll go for badminton.
Less contact. Fair enough. I want to ask you some of the specific questions people have. And I'm just thinking of everybody on this call who's like trying to discern. So far, you guys have said you're probably going to get a nudge if this is something you're being invited into, you know, conducting some kind of experiment this year. It's probably going to be connected to your longings or your pain points. It's going to be some kind of portal, some kind of way that you can open yourself up for God. So before I ask you some of these kind of nitty gritty, how should I think about these questions? Nate, could you pray for this time and everyone who's on the call, and that they would be able to kind of be in tune, whether they're being invited or whether it's something that they can not worry about right now, you know, just so that this conversation can be as profitable as possible for folks.
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy
Thanks.
to.
Thanks.
What a joy to begin to think about something new that you might have for us. Would you cut through the nonsense that we so often cling to of earning and performance and achieving? You just knock that out of us. That we might settle for nothing less then a movement into your heart, a submitted posture, a learning posture, open posture. Tickle our imagination of what you might have for us today. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
I'm going to
All
stoke
right.
up the fire a bit.
Please
Good.
do. Can you hear us when you're over there? Can you hear us when he's over there?
He can.
You can. Excellent. Okay. So I wanted to ask a question Tim asked. This is still in the general category. Stoking the fire. That's so great. This is still in the general category of, is this potentially for me this year? And Tim asked, how do I keep this from just being a self-improvement plan? It's just so tempting to be like, okay, I need to get in shape. So this is my discipline. I'll get in shape. Yeah. Do you have thoughts about that, Nate, while your dad tends the fire?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, that's a challenging one because many people do approach the disciplines as self-help. And I mean, I can press against that. But any movement towards life has the potential for goodness. And our motives are always a mix. I mean, there are certain practices that some of us just should not do because untangling our motives with it, often that has to do with, things like food or exercise and such. So we do come with a mix of motives. But to me, the distinct difference is my intentionality as an opening towards God, a co-laboring of doing it together, and kind of an intentionality with that, and then being honest about my kind of self-centered, no, this is going to make me, impress my friends and neighbors or some nonsense. But there's a tension there, and I certainly would want to caution against just grabbing any self-help practice and kind of baptizing it. Yeah, Dad, what do you got? What do you got on that one?
Well, if we recognize that a great deal of this is hidden, nobody's going to know about it. We're not writing about it except for ourselves. And so we just put down what we feel is happening and grow. And that helps us to undercut all of this self-help silliness, because we are learning to walk with God. God wants to be with us and is inviting us to be with God. Wow. So we'll fail at some things, we'll learn some things, and the end result is, as Paul put it, that righteousness, think of that, righteousness, peace, and joy in the Holy Spirit is what flows in. And so then that is a great stopper on all this, this self-justification, this trying to impress. It kind of does away with at least a lot of that. Nate is absolutely right that we come at these things with mixed motives. I remember one time that I was not going to pray out loud until I had gotten my motives straightened out. Now, it might have been a nice sentiment, but it absolutely froze my ability to pray because I could never get my motives right.
I try. I've learned to kind of laugh at him. Oh, go ahead.
No.
I've learned to kind of laugh at him, right? Like when I kind of become a little aware of some of the kind of selfish motives or mixed motives, to just kind of look at it and go, oh, there you are, look at you go. And then that's a point of prayer as well, and just laying that in almost a playful way before God.
Yeah.
We're that's so helpful, and we're pushing against self-improvement, self-mastery, achievement, but a couple of folks like Roger and Drew are asking, but if I desire transformation in a certain area of my life, like if the spirit has helped me see that there's an area of my life that needs healing, needs work, needs wholeness, is it appropriate to wonder if there's a discipline or an experiment would open myself up to what God might want to do there? And if so, how? Both Drew and Roger are asking in different ways. How do I go about maybe discerning what that might be? You guys have thoughts about that?
Yeah, that's an absolutely right concern. I was thinking, as you were mentioning this, of Evagrius of Ponticus, who in the fourth century was a rising star in Constantinople. And then he, fell in love with a married woman, and it scared him to death. Now, we don't know if it was consummated. We don't need to know. And he fled to the desert and the Egyptian deserts, and never returned. Actually, that ended that part of his life. But he wrote these 8 deadly thoughts, and then compared them with 8 godly virtues, which defeat the deadly thoughts.
Mm.
And that is so helpful to see when I've got a deadly thought. In the case that we've been talking about of pride,
Mm-hmm.
or in our language, arrogance, narcissism,
Mm-hmm.
humility can conquer it. Now, that was one of the biggest experiments for me, because arrogance, pride, narcissism seem so strong. Humility seems so weak. And how is it that these great writers would say, oh, no, humility can crush pride, defeat it, and set you free? So that's a whole process of experimenting with how that works. I don't remember what the question was, but
no, that's great. If we notice an area where we want transformation, then you're saying one suggestion would be, what is the virtue that counters that vice? And maybe rather than white knuckling a year of I'm trying not to do this vice, spending the year focusing on the virtue that can
absolutely. In most of these cases, direct attack against a vice is doomed to failure. We learn indirection, and we come at these things just like, for example, with pride. Service is the discipline that works most fully with pride. Why? Because if I find another human being that I can serve, and I get acquainted, I learn their name, and see them as a unique person, what they're interested in. I begin to find ways to serve them. And what does that do? My focus is moving away from myself to the needs of another human being. And that just has its way over time.
Yeah.
For example, I don't have to control every conversation. I can listen to what the other person's saying. And you see what that does to pride?
So good. Would you add anything to that, Nate?
Not completely remembering the question. I do remember what my answer might be. That sounds like an invitation. I mean, that's this kind of this longing, this like, maybe there's something here I'd like to grow and change. And so, yeah, I'd water, nurture that, listen quite well to that. And it's interesting because a lot of what I find I end up talking about, and maybe some of it here today, is just there's great joy in the disciplines, and it really is freedom. And if it doesn't move us towards love of God and love of others, we might need to examine that a little bit. But yet, even in that, it's okay to suffer, and not to be afraid of that either. That there's a death there, a good death. So like like what Dad was saying about conversation, not controlling or managing a conversation could require great suffering. And so just being okay with that. I'm going to suffer now, and that's okay. I don't have to be afraid of that. And that's something God's inviting me into doing, and it's voluntary.
But just think of the great freedom of not having to have the last word. We can let someone speak and just leave it at that.
So good. Now I don't want to ask the next question because I don't want to control the conversation.
Oh, that's your job. You're supposed to control.
Okay. Phew.
Control away.
So as people are thinking of if they're being invited to an experiment, a couple of people were hoping maybe they could just get some coaching or some brainstorming. So Chris and Beth had similar questions. Chris said, what discipline or experiment would go well with my word of the year, which is joy, which is not a natural word for me. So that's kind of a fun question. And then Beth asked a similar question. She said, as a recovering workaholic, play has become an important spiritual practice for me. Do you have thoughts about that? So Chris, looking for sensing an invitation to focus on joy this year, and Beth sensing an invitation to move away from workaholism. Do you guys have any, if you were her spiritual director or his spiritual director, anything you might ask them to imagine or think about?
I'm not their anything.
Okay, fair enough.
But I do want to say that Beth's response is perfect for the question about joy. Go play. Go in a sandbox and play with little kids. The almost the sillier play, the better. And but just whatever fits you, play. And you can pray and play at the same time.
I'd almost go further that play is a form of prayer. And that I heard this from a friend recently, that in order for us to play, we have to feel safe. And for many of us, I mean, as adults, most of us just do not know how to play. We lost that. I got a good story. my youngest, Kyron, when he was little, he said we were going to spend some time together, and I said, well, what do you want to do? And he said, well, let's just play. And I'm like, right, well, we could go to the store, we could go to the park. I'm kind of like listing these things for us to do. He's like, no, Daddy, I just want to play. And I thought, I don't, that just makes me so nervous. And I said, Kai, like adults, like we forget how to do that. And he started to cry. I mean, it was this tender, like, oh, Daddy, no. Like, oh, but so many of us have. We know how to work and we know how to be whatever, but to just let go and to feel safe enough with God to explore and, well, I mean, that, be like little children. That's worth paying attention to. I mean, I don't think that gets as much airtime as I'd like it to.
Did you end up, did he teach you how to play that day?
I tried. just felt
you
so
worked
awkward.
at playing.
I did.
You worked your hardest at playing. Wow. All right. Well, that's a beautiful story. Let's keep brainstorming. There's some other people asking if any ideas come to mind. Lindsay says, can you give some guidance on experiments that can help me learn how to abandon outcomes to God? Experiment. That's a good question. Hey, how to abandon outcomes to God. Does anything come to mind?
Don't do something that doesn't have an outcome. Like, a friend of mine told me, she was walking on the beach and wrote a poem, like a really, and then tore it up.
Mm. I know that friend, and I heard that story, and it bothered me so much.
I know.
As a 3 on the Enneagram, I'm like, no, productive work that got destroyed. But yeah, that could be a thing. Doing stuff that is not, then you just get rid of it when it's done. Interesting. Oh, I might be called into that, and I hope not. That would torture me.
Now, here's a lovely book, Letters by a Modern Mystic, Frank Laubach, and his experiment. Well, he had many experiments, but one was on a little island. Well, just the background. This was back in the 1930s. He had wanted to be president of a seminary in Manila, I think it was. In those days, when they took the vote, he had a vote and he voted against himself, and he lost the presidency by 1 vote. It was this deep, and anyway, he ends up on this little island, Mindanao, and he's learning, and he's writing letters to his father about what's happening and what he is learning. Listen to this little one. I thought of it because of the poem that the lady tore up. Just at this moment, you must hear more of this sacred evening. The day had been rich but strenuous, so I climbed Signal Hill back of my house, talking and listening to God all the way up and all the way back, all the lovely half hour on the top. And God talked back. I let my tongue go loose, and from it there flowed poetry far more beautiful than any I ever composed. It flowed without passing and without ever a failing syllable for a half hour. I listened, astonished and full of joy and gratitude. I wanted a dictaphone. That date seemed, doesn't it? I wanted a dictaphone, for I knew I should not be able to remember it, and now I cannot. Why, someone may ask, did God waste his poetry on you alone when you could not carry it home? You will have to ask God that question. I only know he did, and I am happy in the memory.
Wow. Amazing. Huh. So one idea here.
So many I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
No, keep going.
Oh, many, many experiments. And then another little book of his, Learning the Vocabulary of God. He says, I want to learn your vocabulary this year. How is it that you speak to human beings? And then he was in India at the time, and that little child that cannot read, is that you speaking to me? And out of that year's experiment, he developed the Laubach literacy method, which was for cultures that had no written language or different things like that. And it became world famous back in those days. That's something?
Millions learn to read from
Yeah,
that, right?
exactly.
Wow. Out of this experiment. That's kind of exciting. Very cool.
That first story that I just love, it's the abundance of God. It's not a scarcity. That I think there's a tendency, at least I have, that some cool thought or idea comes and I just want to write it down. I want to grab it. I don't want to lose it. But just that kind of open hands, that manna will come when it needs to come, and I don't have to control it. It's freedom. It's a grace. Yeah,
that's a good word. Maybe related or maybe a different path. Elizabeth asked for help brainstorming. She said she just read Trevor Hudson's new book, Seeking God. Maybe even with us in the book club. We did that a couple of books ago. And she's continuing to ponder this invitation to die to self. And she wonders if there's any disciplines, practices, experiments if you feel this invitation to learn what it means to die to self. Nate, when we first started working together about 7 years ago, you would talk about that a lot with a big grin on your face about little deaths. Like, it's pouring rain and I'm not going to take the parking place closest to the store. And I remember thinking, like, is this guy okay? He keeps talking about little deaths all the time. But the more time, so you come to mind when I hear that question, but how do you each think about that?
Oh, I love that. I love that. I'd sure like to hear more about how you thought it was crazy. They're little death.
Crazy.
It's a dying to having to have my own way. Like
Yeah.
that is bondage, to run around trying to control everything and getting my own way. One, I probably don't even want my own way in the end. It's probably not going to give me what I want, or am hoping it would. It's just a little death of that, a little freedom. So like the parking lot, I just take the worst spot and pray for who's going to get the good one. And it's thinking of others before ourselves. Um, yeah, death, all these little deaths to self. I mean, fasting has a lot of that in the way we interact with others, but looking for opportunities to die a little. But you do it with there's a joyfulness to it. There's no like drudgery. It's just kind of fun, and then play with the pain, right? Because it hurts. It's just
Yes.
and there's an invitation for prayer. Like, what is it about me that thinks I should have the last piece of cake and you shouldn't? Like, what is that in me that thinks I'm so important that I should be the first one on the airplane to put my bag up and you don't get to do yours? Like, what is? So it's just yeah, yeah, yeah. I do. I like that, little deaths to self. I forgot.
It is the many little deaths of going beyond ourselves. Now think of that part. We learn to go beyond ourselves. And those are little deaths that help us not to be so focused on us and our needs. We learn to go beyond ourselves.
Oh, and here's the irony. It's the path of freedom and joy. Like, I mean, you almost could just think about it, take out all the spiritual stuff, just as a practical way to live. This is a path to abundant life, which in and of itself is spiritual. But it's just happy, joyous, and free. I don't have to control everything. Yeah.
So good. This leads us to Mike's question, which is, could practicing more Christ-like social relational behavior towards others be considered a spiritual discipline?
That one's yours, Carolyn. What you got?
Yes. Yes, I think yes. What do you, I mean, I think Trevor says, and I've heard you guys say this in many ways too, our friend Trevor Hudson, the litmus test of our life with God is our relationships with those closest to us, and just how we treat other people. So Richard, I feel like that's a theme with you, like just knowing the name of your food server and about her life or his life, and a whole year of just attending to the lives of others. It would incorporate so many of the other things we've just talked about, death to self and getting beyond ourselves. But anything else you guys would want to say about that, about just attending to our relationships with others as a spiritual practice?
Your answer is fully complete. Yes is the answer.
Yes, I should have stopped there. Yes. How about you, Nate?
I'll add a part B maybe. In one sense, there's no better laboratory than our social relationships because they're messy. Sometimes at best they're messy, and people hurt us and we hurt others. And so, and I think that's part why many of us live isolated lives is to be in a relationship with others means to look at oneself, and it means to address some of the dark spaces in us that we're not too proud of. So yes, absolutely. I mean, in ways, it's there's a premium there. I mean, it's significant that God, we see that throughout the Old and New Testament, just this insistence on wanting his children to play well together. And that becomes a furnace, for our learning, our becoming, and our healing. So yeah, spot on. Keep going, friend.
Oh, good. All right, let's say that some folks on this call, they do sense a divine nudge and they say, okay, for 2023, I'm going to focus on this virtue or play with this discipline, or maybe I sense this invitation to just die, have these little deaths to self, whatever chance, whenever the opportunity arises. Now the year is rolling out. Let's say it's March. And they're trying to figure out if this was a good idea, right? So we had a bunch of questions that kind of get at, if I sense I'm being called to something, how do I stick with it? And or how do I know maybe its usefulness is done? Maybe it wasn't meant to be for a whole year or whatever. So let me ask you a few of the questions that were submitted that get at that. First comes from Ben. I love this. He says, extrovert with ADHD here. I do great at doing spiritual disciplines for maybe 2 to 3 times. Then I see a squirrel. And his question actually cut off after that, but I think that's perfect. I think that's the perfect way of asking that question. So coaching for someone like Ben, who, it's really great to play with this for a few days and then he sees a squirrel. How would you coach somebody like that?
Follow the squirrel.
Would you? Yeah.
Oh yeah, learn from the squirrel.
Absolutely. The squirrel is God's invitation, maybe to play. Who knows? It's great fun. We have these brown squirrels and black squirrels here on our little area, acreage, and they will chase each other. And oh my goodness, they are so good, of course. But of course, they also fall. They have this incredible ability to grab a tree, but they can miss. And then the fun begins, and away they go, tumbling in the snow or whatever they do. Yeah, look to the squirrel as God's invitation for you to learn and to grow.
Right. Okay, I love that, and I want to go find a squirrel right now. But what if the squirrel is a metaphor for, I think God's calling me. I'm just trying to think of a hypothetical that won't be unhelpful, but I think God's calling me to fast from gossip this year. And so I do that for a few days. And then I think, no, actually, I think he's calling me to something else. And then, a few days later, it's like, no, I think I'm really supposed to focus on, this other practice that I've never done. Is that fine? Is it fine to just, part of the impetus for this is we do want people to think of their life with God a bit like a playground, like try stuff and just try it with God and see what happens. So is that fine? And I think you would say it is, but at the same time, is there value in sticking with something past the initial infatuation with it? I think is maybe behind that question as well. While still affirming the value of chasing squirrels, literal squirrels. But what would you guys say?
You remember that the old writer said that we're to study 2 books, the Bible and the book of nature.
Mm-hmm.
Now, why do we like to go to the woods? Why does it seem so good, so healing? Because there we see the little creatures that creep upon the earth and the trees and whatever. They're doing the will of the Father. So when we've been fighting with situations in our job or whatever, let's go see a little will of the Father.
Mm-hmm.
And learn from that. But then if people, I don't know, my problems is opposite of the question of, you know, going for a few weeks and changing. I mean, on this this little humility project, it wasn't a 1-year project. It was a 3-year project. And to bring it to a close was what was difficult for me.
You are done learning humility. You are not allowed.
Check it off. Nate, how is it for you? Are you able to stick with something for a long time? Are you tempted to bounce around? How do you think about that?
Sure. I mean, I think it's impossible and certainly not wise to make it definitive on that, but live in the tension with it. Oftentimes when we set out to do a new practice, we would do best to cut it in half. Most people set themselves up for failure. I have hardly, my prayer life is next to nothing, so I'm going to pray an hour every day. Like, no, 5 minutes, 3 times a week. Like, start where you're at. So, it may be that you're, trying to be a little heroic with it, and that God is just asking you to start where you're at. But then live in the tension of it. This is freedom. The disciplines are to serve us. They're doorways to help us, be available, give God access to our life. And so it may be that we need to pivot some. Certainly there are things that it's just really clear. No, buckle up. This is for you right now. And yeah, there you go. But there are other times where just, yeah. But these are issues for prayer, which is a spiritual practice, right?
Prayer, and do you think maybe, is there a role for community or
absolutely
spiritual friends, possibly a spiritual director, in terms of discerning? Because we always use that maxim: do spiritual disciplines as you can, not as you can't. If you're trying something and it's so ill-fitting and it's not producing you, Nate, I think you said earlier, more joy and love and freedom in your life, it might need a tweak. And yet at the same time, it takes a while to find out, right? You kind of got to get past that initial learning curve and lean into something. And there's going to be undulation, times when it feels great, when it doesn't. So discerning, like, when is this just not a good match versus when is this just hard, but there's so much potential and promise. I think it might take other people who know as well. What do you guys think? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Good. I'll go with that. Yes. I think we've answered a lot of these. Okay, let's do one more on this, and then I'll take a look at some of the questions that have come in while we've been talking. But Trudy asked, what should I do? Seems like a spiritual discipline is no longer working or beneficial. And her question got cut off, but she was talking about a practice of fasting that she had that was, I think she was saying it was really good for a long time. And then it seemed to there didn't seem to be the same invitation to it. So any coaching about that?
In a new and living way, Jesus comes to us today. And the way he comes to us today can easily be different than the way he came to us yesterday. Don't turn these into legalisms, please. This is great freedom. And we learn to flex and move. Think of those wonderful words of Jean-Pierre de Caussade: the soul, light as a feather, fluid as water, innocent as a child, responds to every movement of grace like a floating balloon. And just how he piles those metaphors up. Light as a feather, fluid as water, innocent as a child. See, that's just the absolute opposite of rigidity.
That's right. I think I'd want to look at how we're defining beneficial, because often I don't know whether this is beneficial, and it's time, and it may have benefits I never see. My concern is that we define beneficial about how we feel, and if I'm, I'm committing to a new practice of reading the Bible, and when it's alive and it's it's just hitting, that's easy. Oh, that must be beneficial. But when it's dry and boring, and that may be the most beneficial. So what I do with practice is I try to remove myself from making assessments particularly from whether or not I feel good, or it gives a kind of holy goosebumps or something. So I think that's if you, and that's part of why I really like to encourage people just to ask. Sometimes people go, which practices should I do? And just ask and wait. And when clarity comes, then there can be a real settledness. I spent a month thinking about whether or not I should do this or that. And then I'm there with gusto. I'm ready to lean in, and whether or not it seems beneficial or not. I don't know if that's answering for her.
I think that's helpful. For sure, the coaching to take some time. Like, you don't have to decide today what this particular thing you might experiment with it. And I also think sometimes it's just a little tweak to what you're trying, like a little, oh, maybe I should do this in the evening instead of the morning, or, like sometimes you could think this just doesn't work for me. And then just a little, that's why we wanted to lean into the idea of experimentation here, that there's some freedom. Yeah,
that's right.
It's good. I think Richard may have to take the lavatory option. So let me keep asking you questions, Nate.
He's working with humility, so a little,
it's good. It's good. Yeah. There are some that have come in live, and there's an important follow-up one from Rebecca. I think it's important about this invitation to die to self. She says, how does someone balance death to self versus submit to abuse? How does someone establish healthy boundaries between those?
Oh, they're not the same thing. I mean, abuse is abuse, and there's nothing spiritual about that. It's demonic, and yes, draw boundaries and don't put up with it. Absolutely. Submission is a willingness, and if it's a little like, if I let you do, if I give you permission, you're not doing anything to me. Like it's a movement of I'm intentionally choosing to do this, little death to self. But yeah, that abuse is, you can say it better, Dad. Not the same thing.
You said it just right.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. I'm
people,
scrolling.
okay, I just got to pause because,
please, yes.
I mean, historically, most of us have had encounters with people who weaponize the Bible to manipulate and control in the name of God. And I think it's very appropriate to call out a cult when we see a cult, and call out abuses when we see abuses, and not, I mean, so many people, I think, out of a sense of, trying to do the right thing, or trying to, kind of follow God, put themselves in situations that are just death for them and others. And so, and community is helpful for that too, to help us see.
Yeah. I think I took a seminar course in grad school years ago called Women's Faith and Development, talking about sometimes the way, and these gender divisions are probably not that helpful, but the point of the course was that women can hear death to self as like a self abnegation, like an annihilation of self. And he's talking about something different. He's talking about you being very much yourself, but now centered around him and his life rather than your own self-interest. But you are still completely yourself. Now you're yourself unfurled and full and flourishing. So yeah,
maybe more so yourself. It's also a position of
than you've
power.
ever been. Yeah. Say more about that.
It's also a position of power. I mean, that when I don't have go, like you referenced, Dad, about not having to have the last word or control a conversation, um, there's a sort of control in that. Whereas when I'm recklessly trying to manage everything, there's a weakness to that I'm trying to manage externals because my internal's not. But to kind of to have the freedom to say no and the freedom to say yes is a, I think, position of power. Although I just thought of that. So Dad, mess with that.
Oh, it's fine.
Good. A few people who have submitted questions live are asking about the spirit of playfulness, particularly that you have, Richard. Susie says, Richard, you seem playful tonight. And that tells us she's in another part of the world because it's night where she is. So hi, Susie. I'm glad you're with us. Richard, you seem playful tonight. Is this your authentic self? Were you more serious when you were Nathan's age? Is it something you grow into? I'm experimenting this year with sounds and noise. There is no silence, so trying to find a way into something with sounds and noise, both man-made and natural. So were you always playful, Richard?
I think Nathan should answer that.
Was your dad always playful, Nathan?
No. No. I mean, it's been fun. I mean, what we're seeing here is his authentic self. Obviously, you know, we're in different moments, call for different parts of our, you know, selves. But no, it's been fun for me. I probably never said this to you, Dad, to watch how you've grown through the years. And the marker I'd see is just a more movement into ease and more at home with yourself and others and God. No, you could get pretty intense back in the day, if I remember correctly.
I remember when I was reading about, I think it was John Wesley, who would get up at 4 a.m. to pray. And so, oh yeah, okay. So I'd get up at 4 a.m. and I'd go to sleep. And so I would stand up and I'd stand up against a wall to pray. Do you know you can go to sleep standing against a wall?
Wow.
So I had to learn that that's just not the way. Not me.
Yeah. So, well, and I think it's encouraging to people. Nate, I remember reading a Wisdom Chaser. Don't you actually refer to your dad in your youth as a serious ghost? Isn't that a phrase? And
silent ghost.
A serious silent ghost. So it's just, I mean, that's kind of what Renovaré is about. What encourages us is seeing it incarnated in a life. We grow and transformation can happen. We grow into progressive freedom. So thanks for letting us see that up close. It's pretty cool. A lot of people had dropped questions in the live chat about attending to nature. Richard, a few minutes ago, you were talking about attending to the Word of God and the Book of Nature, and just asking for tips. How do you do that? Maybe if it doesn't come naturally to you, both of you guys are pretty good at that. So do you have any coaching? Pay attention, open yourself up to God and nature.
I got one, Dad, yeah. Okay, this is cool. So there's a podcast coming out, I think this next week, that I did with our friend Vivian David, and it's on Visio Divina. And I kind of I just never get that. It just, the magical medieval art just doesn't, work for me. But one of the things that emerged in that is that I do Visio with nature. Didn't even know it. Just, like sitting, staring at the squirrels or watching trees or, and just listening and prayerfully wondering, what is there for me to learn here? And not being in a hurry and not being greedy. I don't have to walk away with some big insight. If I do, great, we say thank you. And if I don't, great, we say thank you. but just being there and slowing down, enjoying what is.
Let's come into rhythm with the cosmic patience of God.
Mm.
And just take a walk in the woods, and the slower you go, the more you see. I was looking for a book where John Muir says, when I see a new plant, I sit down for an hour or a day to see what it has to teach me. Now, I've not quite gotten to this day thing, but I can, a few minutes anyway, see what it has to teach me.
It's all in there, right? I mean, if you think of, we're looking at God's art, and art holds the thumbprint of the Creator. It's also a posture of humility too.
Let's say I go for a walk. I think, oh, Richard and Nate said I need to attend to the book of nature, God's world. And I go for a walk, and it's lovely. I breathe oxygen. I see beautiful things, but I have no epiphanies. I do not hear the voice of God. Nothing seismic happened. Did I fail? This is what I want to know. Did I fail? Do you know what I'm trying to get at? I'm just, in case anyone else is like me, and I always feel like something must be accomplished. Maybe this is another way to cultivate abandonment to self, hey? To just appreciate God's nature because it's beautiful and nothing else has to get checked off.
Why wouldn't you? What would you
well, I'm speaking for my people. I know it doesn't make sense, but I'm speaking for my people.
Go ahead,
no,
Dad. Go ahead.
I hear what you're saying.
Remember that beauty is one of the transcendentals, the good, the true, beautiful. And it has its own, you just come away, you don't need some word. Beauty does its own work. You know that from the music that you play. Beauty does its own work. Yeah. And you come away different from that. It's simple. It's not complicated. I mean, let's not try to make these things difficult.
Yeah. So good.
All right. I'm just thinking out loud here. In a sense, it's about control. I'm trying to control what I'm doing here, and that I need this outcome or that, as opposed to just kind of letting go and just being there. I don't. This is maybe not my business. What is happening when I'm immersed in beauty, and okay. Can I shift for a second? I know we're running out of time. And in my preparation today, I wanted to show you a new practice I have started this year.
Please.
Can I do that?
Yes.
All right. On my desk, front and center, sits this. It's a button, right? And throughout the day, this is my pause button. And throughout the day, when I'm feeling just a little worked up, once this is pushed, it's 2 minutes of silence. Just going right there. So listen to the message I created for myself.
Yes, time for a pause. Well done. Deep breath. Enjoy.
That good?
That's awesome.
And I took it further. So my assistant, I work with Melody Leaper. I got her one too. And so we have this rule in our meetings that anyone can push the pause button at any time. And then it's just 2 minutes of silence. And so simple. And I don't want to do it. I look at it. No, do I have to push you? But it's very reliable. Every time I come back with just a little shift to spend 2 hours in silence with God. So
2 hours or 2 minutes?
Oh,
You
yeah.
just said 2 hours.
I did.
You panicked me there for a
That's
second.
the
Is
other
it?
button.
That's the big
That's
giant
the
button.
big
You got to have the
emergency.
codes for that button. That's awesome. All right. Well, we are out of time, but I want to do a couple things. There's one more question I want to ask you that someone posted. Then I want to ask you if there's anything that didn't get said that you feel like really should get said. And then I want to ask Richard if he'll pray a blessing over these folks. So the final question I want to ask you is from an attendee. We talked a lot about playfulness and joy, but this attendee asked if we could speak to the discipline or practice of tears and crying when we find ourselves in deep pain. Anything you would say about that?
As someone who cries a lot. Oh, I mean, it's awful.
Yeah.
But it's healing. And those are the spaces. Those are the end of our rope spaces. Those are the spaces where it's rich and it's deep and it's awful. Oh yeah, don't fear those. I mean, there are some gifts we can only get in those broken spaces. I don't want them, but they're there. Yeah.
There's a really helpful book. There's a really helpful book. It's called Pentos, The Gift of Tears. And the people we should be concerned about are those who have dry eyes and cannot weep.
So we might even want to ask for the gift of tears, as hard as it might be.
Indeed. Yeah. That's often in the old writers of prayer, that they might have the gift of tears.
Interesting. All right, my friends, anything else that should be offered here? Anything you feel nudged to share?
Just this little story when I went to a dear woman who'd been through a lot of suffering, and just to see how she was doing. A friend of hers had died and so on. And when I got there, she was making one of those, what's it called? Crewel work? The thing that spells
cross
out
stitch.
Cross stitch.
Yeah.
And I said, where did you get that? Oh, a few days ago, I was listening and the Lord spoke to me, and she was writing out what she felt God had said to her. And what she wrote out in that cross stitch was, "Fun ahead, saith the Lord." So,
yeah, even in a place of deep suffering and grief.
Oh, indeed. It just meant for her that there was a future. There's something down the road for her. Fun ahead, saith the Lord.
I love it. I love it.
Mourning births forth a deep joy.
So, Lord, how thankful we are to have these moments together. And for those who have been watching, listening from across all different places, may your mercy and peace be upon us all. Please surround us with your great light of protection. Cover us with your blood. Seal us with your cross, that we might learn to walk with you. And especially may this be so for those who weep at this moment. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Nathan. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Monty, behind the scenes. Thank you for everyone on this call for joining us, for how you've cared for each other in the chat. I know Monty's going to play a song for a few minutes just so you get a chance to say goodbye to each other. And the recording will come out in a few days with as many resources as we can gather up for you. But thank you. It's been a wonderful time. Thanks, friends. Take care. Bye-bye.